Hello, what is good, people? Welcome to episode 3. Who could believe it that I've made it to a third episode? And this is a bit of a milestone for me in some ways because with my last endeavour into this space, I made it to 2 episodes and that was it. So we're making progress. That said, let's get started. The funny thing is, I'm still yet to have a title for this podcast. So this is the 3rd episode that I'm recording. By the time I release the first, I think I'll have a name. But that said, let's get on to what we're going to be talking about today. So the first thing is I wanted to talk about is something that's kind of close to me and relates to my current experience at the moment, which is that my wife recently passed her driving test. Applause, cheers. I am very happy. I'm freedom. I'm free from having to give lifts and being the only person that drives in the house. Now, the flip side to this is that, and what I didn't really consider was that it now means that I need to let her know when I'm using the car. And so that's kind of like a new dynamic for me getting used to, this idea that the car isn't just mine to use as and when I see fit. I do need to consider, does she want to go somewhere? Does she have things to do? Are things happening in her world that she might need the car for? And so at the moment I don't use a car that much. I use it maybe 1 or 2 days a week when I drive to work because sometimes I'm a bit lazy like that, even though the work isn't that far away. I'll cycle in summer. I tell myself I'll cycle in summer. But because we now both drive, and obviously there's that new driver kind of excitement where you want to drive everywhere, and so I need to be more mindful of that. So that's kind of an interesting thing. But what I want to talk about a little bit about was the driving test. Now, I passed my test a long time ago, over 10 years ago. Well over 10 years ago. Well over 10 years ago. But what I want to talk about was the preparation for a driving test. And so hopefully she won't mind me saying this, but it wasn't her first time taking the driving test. Let's just put it that way. But yeah, one of the things that I did was to sort of do driving lessons with her to try and help her. And man, was that an experience. It was definitely more of a labor of love. But I realized that being a driving instructor is definitely a different skill set. And obviously I've known this, you need to know how to teach. But what I realized is that sometimes the way people learn isn't necessarily the way you want to teach. And the way I was taught was quite a hard and rigid kind of way, and that worked for me. My driving instructor used to often tell me, if you do that on your test, you're gonna fail. And for me, that was motivation to make sure I didn't do it on my test, and that I made the effort to be aware of that when it came to my driving test. I passed first time. I don't say that as a badge of honor because I think I barely passed. I think I was 2 minors away from failing, but I didn't care because I passed, and that's what I was happy about. But my wife passed with only 2 minors. So I'd like to think I have something to do with that. But yeah, just that process of doing driving lessons with people is not an easy thing, especially with your wife, and you've got obviously marriage dynamics that exist, but then also me trying to apply sort of just my way of teaching dynamics, and it made it a challenging experience, shall we say. So she was still doing driving lessons at the same time because I felt that made more sense. I'm not prepared to help her pass in terms of the things that I know about driving and the way that I've adapted to driving. I know that the way that I drive on a day-to-day basis probably wouldn't allow you to pass your driving test, even though I think I probably could pass the test if I did it again. I've picked up habits and ways around things and kind of ideas about how certain things are done, like positioning myself on a roundabout and what I think is the safest thing to do versus what I think is the driving test appropriate thing to do. And so I was very mindful of that. And so she did driving lessons at the same time. But I also did like extra lessons with just me and her to try and help prepare for the test. And I think that was a really good thing, a really good combination. It saved a lot of money as well because driving lessons are expensive now. When I was learning to drive, it was around £15 to £20 an hour for a lesson. And you could do hour lessons. Now she's learning to drive. It's something like they only seem to do double blocks, and so it's like £40 at a time plus If you want to do it on the weekends at certain times, it's extra. It's like having like a 1-to-1 phone contract back in the day where, it's free on weekends and free after a certain time. But anyway, yeah, it's just surprising to me that the cost of learning to drive now is so much higher than it used to be. And off the back of the pandemic, what is also an interesting thing that's happened is trying to get a driving test is really difficult now. It's not like it used to be. If you want to get a driving test, then you need to kind of factor in at least a couple of months, possibly maybe even longer to get a test, particularly if you want it in a certain location. Yeah, it's definitely something to consider. Like when it comes to that whole driving test thing, it's not like it was when I was doing my test and getting cancellations and rebookings. I mean, the whole test day in itself was crazy. So the first day she had a test, it was rescheduled because of I think she didn't feel like she was ready, which made sense. Then the day that it had been rescheduled to, it was rescheduled, and then the day it had been rescheduled to there was some sort of, I think there was industrial action. I think that's what it was. There was industrial action. And so the test was automatically rescheduled for, I think, the following week. So the following week we get there and we go there to drive in the test center, and there is one examiner there. And I should get her to tell this story. I probably will at some point get her on the podcast to talk about that. But there's one examiner at the driving center. And so we're both there at the same time. There's us and there's like two other groups of people. And so, okay, well, it's one driving instructor. And then he brings out a piece of paper, a little post-it. On the post-it note, he's written a number for us to call. And so what's basically happened is that the driving test was cancelled, but we didn't receive any messages. And if you try to book a driving test, what you'll find is this process you have to go through where they tell us, don't contact us, we'll contact you if anything changes. But in this case, they hadn't contacted us. And then there was a whole lot of calls that we had to do, a whole lot of back and forth. If you tried to call through to the driving test people about your appointment, there was no one to speak to. So what my wife did, which was quite clever, is she called the theory test people. Someone picked up and then she got rerouted to where she needed to go. So anyway, after sort of loads of back and forth, ended up getting the test rescheduled for, I think it was that was a Friday. It was the following Monday, which was a bank holiday, which was kind of fortunate in some ways. But it was just a really stressful time because she's obviously prepared for the test. I'm thinking, yeah, she's got the test. I've already bought like a congratulations, you've passed card, just positive belief and having faith in her ability to pass. And it was just, it's just crazy. And so we come back there on the Monday, she does her test, she passes, and, all is right in the world once again, and there's lots of joy. One of the things about passing, which I think is really interesting though, is that, so you do this preparation for your driving test. You drive on sometimes B roads, maybe up to 40, possibly 50-ish miles an hour, but generally roads that aren't that fast. And this is all the more interesting if you're someone that's learning to drive in London, where so many of the roads have a 20 mile an hour speed limit. And so you'll find that for the most part, you probably spend most of your time driving around 20 miles an hour. But the moment you pass your test, you can go on a motorway. And that's always seemed a bit weird to me, this idea that you kind of prepare for driving on sort of slower roads and in town. And I get the reason for it, you don't necessarily want learners on the motorway. That's probably quite a dangerous thing. But at the same time, I think there's something to be said for there being something in between. And that brings me on to an accident I had when I first started driving on the motorway. But I'll speak about that a little bit more later on. What I want to talk about now is buying your first car. And so after I passed my test, obviously, and so this is kind of becoming an episode about new drivers and maybe the new driving experience. But after I passed my test, obviously the first thing you want to do is get a car if you haven't got one already. Some people do have their cars already, and I think it's great if you're in a position that you can kind of do that. You have somewhere to keep it, because it was a bit weird for me, because at the time, no one in my household at the time drove, and so yeah, it was just the idea of kind of buying a car, and I don't know, I suppose buying a car and insuring a car and not being, not having the full license. I wasn't really sure about that. So anyway, passed my test, bought a car. My first car, as I think I mentioned before, was a Red Rover 214 SI 16 valve, and it was a 3-door, and it was like the sort of the bubble shaped Rover, and I absolutely adored that car. I spent way more money than I should have on it. That car saw at least 2 interior changes, if not 3, but definitely at least 2. It went from a standard interior to a Rover VI interior and then an MG ZR interior, which was red as well, which matched the outside of the car. If you know, you know about the MG ZR and the sort of bucket kind of seats that it had. But yeah, I really adored that car and spent way too much money on it. But yeah, what I'm interested in actually is, so I used to think that, it's your rite of passage when you partial test that you kind of get a banger as your first car. And obviously banger is a relative term depending on what your position is. If you're in a position to get a new car, then it's excellent. But I always kind of assume that everyone kind of gets a banger because there's every chance in the world that you're going to kind of mash up your first car a little bit. And I think that I've revised this a little bit in that I think maybe as you get older, maybe you become a bit more sensible. If you partial test a bit later on, you're less likely to drive around like your hair's on fire, as I did when I got my first car. Everywhere drove as fast as possible, which is really stupid, not something that I recommend. But it's one of those things that you're excited, you're young, you've got a car, you've got access to the world and, open roads, so to speak. But yeah, I used to think that everyone that gets a new car, everyone gets their first car, it's going to be like a bit of a banger, and then, you kind of learn to drive in that car and then you get a nice one afterwards. But what I seem to see is like this finance thing kind of, just as I mentioned in the last episode about people sort of financing cars and getting, new wheels and a map, and that's sort of been the way the industry's going in terms of modifying cars. A lot of people get like quite nice cars as their first cars, and I think this is quite an interesting thing. I think if you're younger, it makes sense to lean towards getting something either, if not at least cheaper, but something not so premium, just because there is every chance that with your inexperience, you're likely to have an incident or an accident or put some scrapes in it, or maybe some dents. And if it's a more expensive car, then it ends up being quite a costly endeavor to get that sorted out. And so I think there is a temptation particularly with what I see. I live in London, so I think I'm basing it on what I see in London. I think that everyone wants to kind of have like these sort of lifestyle and flex and kind of show out a little bit. And I think that there is I don't want to say a propensity or a leaning, but I get the sense that people spend maybe a bit more than they should on cars. Maybe they go to uni and sort of get a student loan and get something on finance that they probably can't really afford. And this is one of the interesting things. When it comes to cars, it's easy to kind of buy a car in many ways and to pay for whatever it costs, maybe even to finance it on a monthly basis or PCP or whatever it is the buying mechanism you're using to get the car. But all the other costs that go into running the car. And so this is one of the things that you kind of don't really think about. You think, oh yeah, freedom, going to be on the road, going to be driving. And petrol was a lot cheaper when I first started driving. It was like around, what was it, 82 to 86, something like that. I remember the first time petrol went up to £1, everyone was losing their minds and there was like protests about it and everything. And now it just sailed past that and petrol was well into the sort of 140s. I think it might even touched 150 or 60 at a point. It's coming down now to about 140, but that's £1.40 per litre, by the way. In the UK, petrol is priced per litre, even though fuel consumption for cars is advertised in miles per gallon. And I kind of feel like that's an intentional misdirect because that doesn't make any sense. Why don't they tell you what the miles per litre are? Because that'll give you a better indication as to how fuel efficient or inefficient the car that you've got is. But yeah, when you first start driving, you want to drive everywhere and you just get excited by the idea of ownership. But if you haven't had a car before, then the costs can be something that kind of come out as a surprise. So it's definitely a couple of things to be mindful of there. And it's things like how much insurance costs. And this was something that, interestingly, I call myself a car guy from a young age, even before I had a car, but I'd never really considered how much it costs. Only once I'd sort of got the car. Did I have insurance at the time? I think someone had helped me set up like a temporary insurance. And so I drove the car home and I started looking for insurance in earnest. And this was kind of like sort of early internet comparison-ish times, possibly. Wasn't maybe as widely available as it is now. But I was looking at different places. And at the age of, I think I was 18, 19. What year were you when you first started uni? I think I was around 18 when I first got my first car. And so yeah, I think I was 18 when I first got my car, and looking for car insurance was a real eye opener. Living in London, not living in a particularly great area, probably quite not really a nice area. So I lived at the time on Aylesbury Estate. I don't know if you know that in London. It was famous for being the backdrop of a Channel 4 advert at one point, where they kind of got like newspaper and stuff and had it sort of blowing in the wind, that sort of thing. Had the longest residential housing block in Europe. So don't live there now, obviously moved out. But at the time I lived there, and so that area didn't have the greatest of profiles in terms of like crime and stuff like that. So insurance was shockingly bad. I remember looking through so many different places, and I remember I think it was Endley that offered me insurance in the end for the princely sum of, I think it was either 1,400 or it was around 1,400 to 1,200 pounds for third party only insurance on the Rover. And I'm not sure if that's really legal, if you're allowed to have third party only. So third party only insurance basically means that if I crash the car into something, then it's the thing that I hit is covered. Basically, if I hit somebody else's vehicle, they're covered. But it's not third party fire and theft is usually what you hit. It's usually fully comp or third party fire and theft. In the case of third party fire and theft, if your car's stolen or it is, I suppose, catches fire and burns down, then your car's insured. But with third party only, you are only insured for damage to third parties. So like to other people and other people's property, basically. Which was interesting. So I had that for a year, but then after that first year, it started to come down a little bit, but it comes down really slowly. I remember thinking that once I hit sort of 20, it's going to really get cheap, and got really excited. It's like not really. Once I hit 25, it's going to get really get cheap. Not really. Once I get into my 30s, then it's going to really get cheap. Kind of. And I think, I suppose now it's kind of started to get down to reasonable levels. And maybe partially to do with the risk profile of living in London. But yeah, car insurance is still not really that cheap. I mean, at the moment I'm paying around 500 or 600, 500. And I've got plenty of no claims bonus, no accidents within the last 5 years. Yeah, it's just, I don't even bother protecting my no claims bonus anymore, but that's a different story. What I will say though is, if you are looking for car insurance, something I recommend highly is going to moneysavingexpert.com. So yeah, Martin Lewis, that same guy. Go to that website, and they've got a process that you can go through to help you find a really competitive quote. And so it's things like tweaking, things like your job profile. Again, this isn't lying, it's not fronting, it's not pretending, it's a legal process. So picking a job profile that relates to something that you do. I think a good example of this is some jobs that can be argued that are quite similar. So coach driver versus bus driver can have quite different prices for insurance, even though they're very similar. And again, similar sorts of things. Whether you say you're an actress or an entertainer, you could argue those are quite similar job profiles or roles. But when it comes to insurance and how it's calculated, the price can be quite different by a few £100s. So he's got this thing that allows you to pick a job title that relates to what you actually do. And so I do encourage you to do that. And this process that you can go through, where you go through the different comparison websites like Go Compare, Money Supermarket, and all these things, and that really puts you in a good position to save a lot of money. And that's something that I do. That's one of the few things that I'm consistently on top of each year, that I make sure I'm sort of hunting around and searching around to try and find the most competitive insurance quote. And then when you kind of get your quote, sometimes you can even call up and get a bit of a reduction there. And so I do encourage you that if you are insuring a car, first car, any car, do that sort of process that he talks about on the website. That's really cool. Insurance is an interesting thing. Something I'll speak about a little bit more in a moment, in relation to insurance and accidents. But one of the things that I think is good, when you first start driving, you want to drive everywhere. You're excited, you're gassed. It's cool to be on the road. And this was me. I used to offer people lifts to places just so I could drive, because I wanted to go somewhere. I'd even go out in the car and just go for a drive just because I enjoyed driving so much. But something that's interesting I found with this was, be careful what you ask for, especially in regards to giving people lifts. And so people started to just call me when they wanted to lift somewhere. And then at first, this was really cool because, I enjoy driving. And I said, I enjoy driving. Just let me know. I'll drop you to wherever. And I would do this, but I would never charge petrol money. But then what I noticed is over time, it's became like an expectation that, he likes driving. Just call him and he'll drop you here, pick you up and drop you there. And then people would call me at seemingly, Well, at the start, it was at sensible times, but over time, it became stupid. Like, people start calling me at 11, 12 o'clock at night, as if I was their only hope to get home, and, calling me from all kinds of random places. And at first I would do it, but then, it's my mates and stuff. But then after a while, I kind of said to myself, this isn't really making sense. Like, I'm doing more mileage and burning more petrol for other people than I am for myself. And after a while, I kind of said to myself, well, I think I still enjoy driving, but I was like, well, I'm not going to be paying for petrol for everyone to drive all over the place. People have gone out, spent money, had a great time, but then I'm paying out of my pocket to drop you home. That doesn't really make sense, If we're going out together, that's fine, of course. On the odd occasion where maybe someone's stranded and genuinely in a situation where they need help, yeah, of course. But if you're literally just calling me to be your Uber, and that kind of became like that at a point. People would get dressed up and say, yeah, come to my house. I'll come to their house, pick them up. I'll wait for them to get ready. I'll wait for them to come downstairs. That wait that you do. Oh, yeah, I'm ready to go now. You sure you're ready to go? Yeah, I'm ready to go. Get there. I'm waiting outside for that 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes sometimes, even a bit longer. And then you go downstairs and come downstairs, drop them to where they're going, and then I just go back home. Like, I had no intention of going out. But what I started to do was charge people lift tax. And so if you wanted me to come pick you up, cool, I'll do it, but I'm going to charge you petrol money. And that kind of balanced things out a whole lot. So I noticed that people stopped calling me so much at that point. And so maybe if you're somebody that does like to drive, do consider the lift tax. If they don't want to pay it, they don't have to pay it. They're going to get Uber, that's fine, do your own thing. But if you're calling me out of my house at stupid o'clock, no, that wouldn't happen. I'm a married man with a child. You're not going to call me unless it is genuinely an emergency, and just to drop you to a party or around the corner because you want to go somewhere. But that's that was that. So speaking about insurance and accidents, definitely was insured. Always been insured. Well, I say I've always been insured. On one of my first insurance policies, I think it might be the one before Ensley, but what I had was this 10-month bonus accelerator thing. And so the idea was that it's a bit of I don't want to call it a scam, but it's a bit of a misdirect, because the idea is that you pay for this 10-month policy, and then after 10 months they give you a year's no claims. Now, what I didn't really consider was that the reason why the policy was cheaper is because it was a 10-month policy. And so the policy didn't, the policy was cheaper because you're cutting 2 months off your insurance. Now, when you get to the end of that 10 months, only that insurance company can give you the 12 months, can honor that 12 months in terms of that whole year bonus, no claims bonus. So I'm not sure if this is the same in every country, but in the UK, for every year that you have insurance, whether it be home insurance, car insurance, and various other types of insurance, for every year that you don't claim on insurance, you don't get any money back, but you do get a no claims bonus. And this no claims bonus goes towards making your insurance cheaper. And so the idea is that the longer you hold insurance continuously without claiming on it, the cheaper it should become in some ways, because what you've shown is that you are a safe and driver and that you don't have accidents, essentially. And so the idea is that you're rewarded for that with this no claims bonus. Sometimes you can do something called protecting a no claims bonus, so you pay to protect it. I personally don't really think this, I don't really believe in it. I'm not saying don't do it, but by all means do your own research and look at it and look at the numbers. But what I kind of thought about was that, well, if I protect my no claims bonus, I only really protect it with that insurance provider, in my mind at least. Again, if I'm wrong about this, please do let me know in the chat or in the comments. But if I protect my no claims bonus and have an accident, then I still have an accident on my record. And so if I go somewhere else, even though whether my no claims bonus is protected or not, I think you don't ever lose all of it. Let's say you have 5 years of no claims bonus, you have an accident, then you go down to, I think it's 2 or 3, something like that. But you don't lose all of it, whether you protect it or not. And even in either case, you still have an accident on your record, so it still affects your insurance. So I'm not sure, it hasn't really been clear to me how I benefit from protecting it, because I still have to declare the accident when I go to get my next policy, and that still affects it negatively. So I wasn't really sure that there's a point in paying the premium to protect my no claims bonus to hopefully make my insurance a bit cheaper than it would be had I not protected it in the case of accident. I'm not really sure that the economics of it, or in the real world, it actually works out, particularly if you move between insurers. And I recommend moving between insurers because if you stay with the same insurer, you basically get ripped off. Every year that you stay with the same insurer, generally speaking, your insurance gets more expensive. It doesn't go down. So you're not really rewarded for your loyalty. I think that might be changing in the coming years, but time will tell. But yeah, speaking about that first accident. So this is one of the things I think is, again, interesting about driving, where you get your license and you can drive on the motorway. And so one of the things that I found myself doing as someone who likes to drive was going to Sheffield. So one of my friends, good friend of mine, he's actually had some interesting cars. I think I'll probably feature him at some point because he's got an M4 at the moment. But yeah, he was at university. He went to Sheffield and we went to Sheffield because road trip, why not? And on my way to Sheffield, we're on the motorway cruising in a 3-car convoy. So he's got a Fiat Punto at the front. I think it's a red one, Fiat Punto Sporting. Another friend of mine also had a Rover 214 SI. His one was green. So similar spec to mine, but I like to think mine was a bit better because I had lowered it on MGZR springs. I had the MGZR interior. I had the aftermarket back box, and I had like a cone for air filter, so it sounded a little bit more bassy. And I also had a blue LED light in my interior. Don't judge me. But anyway, so yeah, I felt like my car was a little bit better, but that's by the by. So we're in this 3-car convoy, driving on the motorway, having a great time. I think it was my first time on the motorway. I was nervous, but also excited because you get used to driving on the motorway after a while. But new driver, and suddenly traffic comes to a standstill. I mean, a dead stop. And so I'm looking at the road, going a bit quickly. I don't think we were even speeding at that point. I mean, the 3 of us end up driving in a line, which is always a bad idea. So if you're ever going with people on the road, don't drive in a line behind each other. It's not a great idea. So we're driving on the motorway up to Sheffield, having a good time. One of my boy, who is in the passenger seat next to me, who's actually the brother of the guy going to Sheffield. So his older brother was going to Sheffield University, and we're all going up there to go and see him. Or going up there with him. So we're on the motorway, it's 3 cars, having the best time, blazing music with my flip up head unit that I had at the time because I thought that was cool. I had a head unit that came up and played like DVDs and stuff. But yeah, so I'm driving down the motorway and I see standstill traffic in front of me. And so I'm thinking, okay, I better start slowing down. Well, did I notice standstill at the time? I don't know. But traffic starts to slow down dramatically. Now, see Callum's brake lights. See my mate in the front. He's in the Punto. Sees brake lights. Okay, he's slowing down. Then see the green Rover, my other friend. He's slowing down. And then I start to slow down. Okay. Slowing down, braking. I'm looking at the way the slowing down's happening. I'm like, it feels as though the cars are coming up kind of quicker than I'm used to. And so I'm braking, but I don't really brake with anywhere near enough force to stop in time. And by the time that I realised that I need to brake hard, and my car didn't have any ABS, it's too late basically. And I hit the brakes, everything locks up. I think I tried to steer a little bit, but obviously I didn't. As much as I love cars and stuff, I didn't realise that when you have a car without ABS and you hit the brake hard, all that happens basically is your car turns into a roller skate and it just slides straight forward, even though you might turn the wheel. And so this is what ABS does. ABS basically releases and clamps, puts your brakes back on very quickly, and that allows the car to turn so you can still steer when you brake really hard. But car had no ABS, didn't even realise that. Hit the brakes. So Tyson, or my friend in the green car, who's also a new driver, he goes into so the first car, the Punto stops well ahead of the other cars. I think the car in front of him might have been a Beetle, but he stops and it's fine. And the green Rover goes into the back of the Punto, and then my Rover goes into the back of the other Rover. And then, my friend in the green car jumps out and goes, "No damage, no damage." And I'm sitting there in my car. As my car hit his car, I saw the bonnet just slowly begin to rise and crumple up, and just this feeling of pain. And then my friend in the seat sit next to me kind of wakes up and is like, "Oh, what happened? Did we crash?" I was like, "Yeah." And so then I'm like in disbelief. I'm sitting in the car looking at the bonnet, just obviously kind of creased and kinked up, and I don't want to get out of the car. And my friend in the green Rover jumped out and he's like, "No damage, no damage." And I'm just looking there thinking, "Well, you haven't seen my car." And yeah, guy in the punter in the front, he gets that. So what I was talking about is the first accident that I have. And so the first accident I had was on the motorway. I think that people should be prepared for motorway driving before they pass the test. I recognise that learning drivers on the motorway is not a great proposition, but maybe just before you have your test, there should be some way of kind of getting at least motorway driving experience. And so, story goes, basically, I was with a bunch of my friends. There's 3 of us in a convoy rolling to Sheffield. One of my friends goes to university at Sheffield. None of us go to university there, but we all wanted to drive because it was summertime and hey, vibes. So what happens is we're on the motorway cruising as we do. I don't think we're even speeding, but we're driving in convoy. So 3 of us are in a line, and I don't ever recommend doing this. You know, driving in convoy is not a great idea. So 3 of us are driving down the motorway. Definitely keeping up with traffic. Not sure how fast we're going, but I believe it was the speed limit. I believe. We hit sudden slow moving traffic, as it happens on the motorway sometimes. And so my friend who was in the car in front, which was a car in front is a Punto Sporting. I think it was like a P-Reg or something at the time. Car behind is like a T-Reg Rover 214 SI. Same car as mine, literally. Rover 214 SI 1612. His is green with tints. Mine is red without tints, but has modifications, so I think it's a little bit better. But that's by the by. So we're going on the motorway now. Obviously, my friend in the first car, who's experienced, sees to slow down traffic, starts to slow down. Friend in the second car starts to slow down. He's also sort of similar to me, not a particularly experienced driver, but has been driving for a little while. He's a recent driver. He starts to slow down. I start to slow down. And I just remember seeing brake lights and thinking, these cars seem to be coming up a little bit quickly. So I started to brake, but I didn't really brake hard. And again, this is me being used to driving in the city. And so at a point, I began to realize that I'm not going to stop in time. I'm not going to stop. And so I hit the brakes really hard, lock up the car, and that basically means the wheels stop moving at this point. And I didn't know that my car didn't have ABS. And so I hit the brakes. I think I remember trying to steer, but the car not doing anything. There was another time where that happened. That's a story for another time. But I remember trying to steer, thinking I can do this, and the car just was a roller skate, just went straight. And so Punto stops sensibly with space in front. Rover goes into the back of the Punto. Then my Rover goes into the back of the other Rover. Now, what's funny about this is straight away, my friend who's in the green Rover jumps out and says, no damage, everything's fine. And I'm sitting there looking at my car, and my car is anything but fine. What's good to know about my vehicle is that it previously had been accident repaired. Now, this had been repaired cheaply, is probably the best way to put it. So I think what had happened is the slam panel was broken. So the slam panel is the panel at the front of the car, which goes behind the bumper, which I suppose is called slam for a reason. But it's where the headlights are kind of housed and the radio usually goes in there. Now, this car had been damaged, and how they'd repaired it was that they basically pulled the front of the car out and I think replaced the bonnet with a new bonnet. But what I didn't realise is that, particularly on the Rover, maybe there wasn't a lot of metal in the slam panel, and maybe this is why cars have plastic slam panels now to prevent this from happening. But yeah, so the car had been pulled out, damage had been pulled out, and it cosmetically looked fine-ish, but if you lifted the bonnet, there were sort of creases, and I didn't really appreciate the gravity of what that meant, because essentially the crumple zones on my car have been compromised. And so crumple zones are parts of the car that are intentionally designed to deform in an accident. And by deform, I basically mean break, but they break in a way that's safe. It means that all the energy from the crash gets dissipated through the parts of the car which break and come apart. But the crumple zones have been compromised. So all that force went straight into the same points again. And my bonnet I remember hitting the car in front and just watching as my bonnet gradually kind of started to rise up and crinkle, and I was just like, oh no. And there's that horrible sinking feeling where you kind of get out of the car and my friend's there shouting no damage, and I'm thinking, but I can see my bonnet smash up. I don't know how bad the damage to the car is, but it feels like it was particularly bad. If you ever have hit anything in a car, it feels 10 times worse than it is often. I have my car and it's smashed. And it's interesting, I think for some reason I got the idea, like maybe I could kind of do something about this, and I basically pulled it out at the side of the road, of the motorway. So I kind of pulled kind of as hard as I can and pushed the bonnet down, tried to kind of push it so it kind of all lined up, sort of ish. Yeah, and so I was upset for the rest of that journey and the rest of that week, I think, while I tried to get the car sorted out. Yeah, in the end, I actually got it sorted out by taking it to a mechanic, and they were just kind of like, to do this properly, it's going to cost more than the value of the car, but they can kind of do something. So I think they undid like a bolt in the bumper, and then that allowed the bumper to kind of spring back into shape, and then pulled the slam panel out a little bit, and kind of just basically, which is shows the car must have been really weak, because it basically kind of just like manipulated it manually to make it all kind of line up roughly again. And I think that cost it like £100 or something like that, which was quite cheap at the time. And I suppose I was pleased enough. But retrospectively, I probably should have got it either repaired properly or kind of scrapped the car at the time. Obviously, we didn't want to claim on each other's insurance because that would have just killed us all as newer drivers. A friend in the Punta was a bit of a more experienced driver, but still, their cars weren't really damaged. There was a bit of damage to the back of the Rover, my friend's car, the green one, where I'd hit it, but it's more like kind of like scuffed. It was really quite minor, and so seeing that he had the same car as me and he hit the car in front, seemingly got at the same speed, it's just that my car had really been like compromised in terms of the crushable parts of the car at the front, because his car wasn't damaged like my one was. So yeah, that was interesting. But that's all that to say. I think that this makes a strong case for new drivers doing Pass Plus, and it's something that I went and did later on. And I think it's really a worthwhile experience, particularly if you're someone that's going to be driving on the motorway a lot. But for all drivers that, you've sort of learned to drive maybe in a city, and Pass Plus was really great at providing roadcraft. Now, I wish I could remember the name of the person that did my Pass Plus with, but I remember it was a guy that was in Kingston. And I remember he had a 1 Series that was like I think it was like a 135 diesel or something like that, but it was a pretty quick car. And the registration plate was M15UMT. And I think he said that he used to work for MI5. It was M15UMT. And I think he said that he used to work for the police or MI5 or something like that. And UMT was Unusual Means Team. So I don't know if that was true or not, but I believed him. And he took me on this sort of evening, this day out through like the countrysides of around Kingston, and went to like this pub somewhere, which was really, really nice experience actually, and I really recommend people doing it. But he's a really good guy. I wish I could remember his name, and I wish I still had his details, but that was a long time ago. But when we went on this this sort of driving experience, by the time I got around to actually booking with him, I think he had changed his car from a 1 Series to a 3 Series convertible. And so this is really, it's really quite a cool idea. And so I think he was doing driving lessons for people in a 3 Series convertible. I think it was like an E46 model. The E46? It wasn't an M3. It was just a 3 Series from that kind of era. So that was really cool, because I was driving this car sort of in the countryside and with the top down and stuff. And what he was showing me was like different things about roadcraft. So one of the things that you can do, for example, when you're on the motorway, is like closing people. And so this is the idea that as you drive down the motorway and you get you might come across a slow moving car in the outside lane, particularly if you're anywhere in London. People seem to not understand how the motorway works, and for some reason everyone is obsessed with driving in the fastest lane as slow as possible, while the slowest lane seems to remain empty a lot of the time. And so one of the things that he taught me was that what you can do is, if you're in the fast lane, you want to overtake someone who's driving slowly, as in significantly under the speed limit, you can drive up behind them, and maybe this is where sort of Audi and BMW drivers are born. But I know it's basically that you gradually close the distance between you and the car in front. And what this should show that driver is that actually you want to pass, and they will move over and let you pass. Now, sometimes it doesn't happen, so what you should do is back off. Now, for some BMW and Audi drivers, they seem to miss that second part and not back off when the person doesn't move out of the way, or they go over to undertake, which I don't recommend doing. But that said, he taught me that, and I find that generally works really well. Particularly when you get further outside of London, people seem to become more compliant and kind of understand how to use the road better. But what he also showed me was that really allowed me to enjoy country roads. And so if you're somebody like me who enjoys, shall we call it, spirited driving, and when I got the TT later on, I really took advantage of this. When you're on the country roads, he helped me to understand how to understand what the road was doing before you got there. And so observation is massively important when you're driving, of course. But what I understood from this was that if I'm driving down the road and I'm going towards... I'm driving down the road, looking at how the road meets allowed me to understand what the road was doing. And so you can look at things like the lines of trees, but also the lines of lampposts, and observing how they bend as you're driving down the road. But also, if you're approaching a bend and you look at the point where the two roads meet, if that point seems to that middle point seems to stay still, then you know it's going to be quite a tight bend and you should slow down a lot. If that point seems to continuously move, then you understand that the bend is opening up or it's quite an open bend. And so what I was able to understand from that is that as I'm driving, it gave me a lot more confidence when being on a country road. And sometimes this can be quite a daunting thing for people who are sort of city dwellers and you're not used to driving the country roads. It feels as though you never quite know what the road's doing, particularly if you're not using like a sat nav. But even if you are, sometimes it can be a bit disconcerting. But I find it really, really reassuring to kind of be able to read the road ahead and recognize, okay, well, up ahead maybe I see what seems like a ring of lights, so it's probably going to be a roundabout. So I'm aware that it's a roundabout coming up. But as I'm kind of able to understand what the road's doing, I can drive the car, particularly if you're driving a slightly more sporty car. You can enjoy the car within the speed limit, of course, but you can enjoy the car more because you can kind of read the road and see what it's doing before you get there. You can recognize when the bend is getting a bit tighter, it's going to be quite a sharp bend, and so you slow down a bit more. You can see when the bend's opening up, so you can get back on the power, and that was a really cool experience for me. I really enjoyed that, and so I do recommend even if you're not like a petrol head and you're not looking to, drive in a spirited fashion through the countryside, I still do encourage, particularly new drivers, to have that motorway experience, to have someone who kind of understands the more advanced points of driving and can give you some really practical tips that can help you drive in a more efficient, more effective, a more enjoyable manner as well. Yeah, so I suppose the last point I want to talk about today as we come towards the end is a point about the future of cars. And one of the things that this podcast is all about is about car culture and, understanding what different groups of people experience and speak possibly to what the future might be for cars. As I've said in the previous podcast, I think we're at this really interesting point where kind of at this crossroads, petrol engines are kind of doing their last stunts, so to speak. They've kind of been developed as much as they're going to be developed, according to many manufacturers such as Mercedes. And electric cars are becoming a more commonplace in the more commonplace experience and a more commonplace feature in our day-to-day driving. We're seeing cars charging outside the road, cars charging at lampposts, going to supermarkets or shopping centres or the mall, if you call it that, and seeing that there's charging stations there. I think it's a really interesting thing. And so one of the things I do look to do with this podcast is hopefully start to speak to more people in the audience out there. So if you've got someone that you think might be quite good for this podcast, then please do share this with them, and hopefully I can have a sit down with them and talk to them about their experience about sort of in the past, but also possibly the future, and seeing where things are going. So whoever that might be, someone with an interesting car, someone who's maybe part of a car club, or if you're a car designer, or if you're studying automotive engineering, or you're studying, about cars, maybe you work in a car factory, whatever that might be. I think I'm really keen to speak to people from all different walks of life and to share that experience with people on this podcast. So I am considering and looking to kind of speak to some of my friends about their experiences with cars as well. I think I may have someone on the next podcast, so do watch out for that. That's it. The future of cars. I was browsing YouTube, as I do often, and I came across someone who was 3D printing a Lamborghini Aventador. And that really got me thinking about the future of cars and how that future might look. And what was really cool about this is that it's a sort of father and son team, and I think they're one of maybe only 5 people in the world who are doing this. And they had basically bought like a sort of hobby grade, or sort of like a kind of 3D printer that you buy to use in your house. And they've gotten quite a long way with this and had to buy another one later on. But the main thing was that they were 3D printing this Lamborghini. And so they'd got a scale model, I think it was like a 1/10 scale, a model of a Lamborghini. And they kind of measured it and kind of created parts in SolidWorks, which is what's called a 3D authoring software. Basically, it's software that you can design parts in 3-dimensional space in. And so they've been sort of measuring parts on this scale model and then kind of using that to help them create parts for a Lamborghini. Now, there's a couple of things I want to say is that as much as the whole car was 3D printed, it's a bit of a caveat in that the car sat on top of a space frame. So if you think of tubes as still welded together, and it had like obviously an engine from, I think it was like an LS engine with a Porsche gearbox on it. And there's a kit you can buy apparently. I don't know too much about it, but it did seem quite interesting. And so the base of the car is space frame, sort of kind of like a kit car you'd have, I suppose, in some ways. And then the body on top and the different parts inside have been 3D printed. Now, I think what was really cool about this is that this kind of got me thinking about the future, where, you know, at the moment now, 3D printing technology is kind of in its still in its relatively early days. It's like the early days of the internet. And I think in the short term, we tend to overestimate how much difference the technology is going to make. And in the long term, we tend to underestimate how much difference the technology is going to make. And I think the internet is a really good example of that. You know, when we look at the internet, we kind of saw it as being a bit of a fad. It's a bit of this like kind of this fun thing that people like send, people go into chat rooms on and nerds kind of use. But what we've seen the internet become is woven deeply into the fabric of our day-to-day lives, from banking transactions, from YouTube to social media, to emails, to all sorts of things. I think it's fair to say that the internet has become, you know, an integral part of everyone's life on a day-to-day basis. But even if you're just a mum that lets your child watch a bunch of Cocomelon or whatever that might be, yeah, it's become something that's a massive part of our day-to-day lives. And so with this sort of 3D printing, that got me thinking, could we be facing a future where maybe there's 3D printing an entire car becomes possible? Maybe if not in the house, there's somewhere you can go, you can kind of get a vehicle 3D printed, or maybe even get parts of your vehicle kind of 3D printed, and or allow that vehicle to be customized more to yourself. And I think this is interesting when you look at like how cars have been. Somebody. Hello, how you doing? Good. Okay. Good, you? Yeah. So I think this is particularly interesting when you look at like how the car industry has changed in general. We've gone from a lot of manufacturers having a modest number of models. So if you look at Audi, for example, they only had a handful of models in the past. They had the A3, A4, I mean, they had the A2 at a point in time, but that wasn't that long a run. So you had the A3, A4, A6, and A8. And now if you look at the model range that Audi offers, some of them are sort of platform shared cars with other marks in the Audi, the Volkswagen Audi, Vauxhall, in the Volkswagen Audi group. But they've got so many more cars that they offer. So you've got like the Q series of vehicles, the Q3, Q5, Q8. You've got A5, A4, A6, A8, A7, possibly even the A9 in the future. But yeah, I do wonder if, just as we've kind of identified new segments of people or new types of vehicle that kind of fit specific classes of people, so whether that's a sports car or saloon, maybe what we'll see is that manufacturers start to offer customers the opportunity to 3D print certain parts of their car or to customize it through the use of 3D printing. And so it's something that you see at the moment maybe with manufacturers use in terms of rapid prototyping. So what they might do is to help them kind of in the production of cars, in addition to things like the clay model, they also will 3D print components of the car to kind of allow them to test different versions of something really quickly. So, for example, if you have some different ideas for headlights or taillights, you can 3D print loads of versions of those and kind of get a sense of what they look like on their vehicle quite quickly, and that's pretty cool. But I do wonder if maybe there'll be a case where, if not 3D printing entire vehicles, maybe there's like, or maybe even 3D printing entire vehicles, and there's like a licensed version that you can kind of, or licensing process you can go through. So maybe you print a part of the car and it gets certified by a company like Lamborghini, and they allow you to say, okay, well, you've used the right resin or materials and this meets our standards, and so yeah, this is a Lamborghini approved printed part. But then maybe you'll have like sort of, you know, if you go to like Turkey, you kind of got, is it Turkey I went to? And you've got like the authentic replicas where it's like basically like, I suppose what's supposed to be high quality fakes. I wonder if that would be a thing, because I don't know what happens when 3D printing technology becomes really cheap or starts to become really good. You know, at the moment there's still a lot to be done. I think the people that print that Lamborghini, they actually kind of sandwich some of the parts in carbon fiber to make them stronger, because 3D printed parts have something called I think there's like a glass temperature, and what happens is if you, like with most cars, you know, you dry them outside in the sun and they're fine. but if you've got like a red car, maybe the paint fades. If you put certain types of plastic out in the sun for a long period of time, then those can crack and lose their strength because of ultraviolet light. And so there's things that it did around that to kind of overcome that. But I think it was really cool as a experiment into what is possible when it comes to 3D printing, particularly considering that they're not using like industrial 3D printers, they're using kind of consumer grade sort of home workbench style 3D printers. What was interesting about this, I think, was how Lamborghini approached it. And I think Lamborghini supported this build, and they actually featured it in like a Christmas advert. I think a Christmas advert, which I watched before this podcast. So I'll post a link to that on this video somewhere. But yeah, that was really cool. I thought it was really cool that Lamborghini kind of supported it and did like a video around it. And I think it was quite touching actually. Someone who's really like a car guy, and seeing like this 3D printed Lamborghini Aventador Roadster. I think it was the SV actually, but that aside, was a project that the father and son had built together. And I think what Lamborghini tapped into there for me was this idea of kind of like what it means to be like a petrol head and to be a car guy. And as much as it is about the vehicle, it is also a lot about the community and people and the experiences people have when they're driving. Again, one of the reasons for this podcast is to tap into this sort of idea and to investigate this more. And I think it's a really beautiful example of, I think it's fair to say a luxury goods manufacturer really kind of understanding, or just a manufacturer in general, a company understanding people and understanding relationships and understanding, I think at that point, for example, that young boy, that moment is forever in his mind. In the advert, what they did was I won't spoil it for you, but you see a real Lamborghini in the advert. And I think that moment where like he kind of looks at the car and just the relationship he has with his dad, I think that's where, you get a true kind of petrol head is born in many ways. You've created like a really memorable experience for him where he felt a great deal of love from his father, and he had this experience in this car. And it's like, wow, like this moment with this car meant so much more than any of the vehicles that were involved, the 3D printed one or the real one that I've seen. And it was interesting that I felt like Lamborghini really understood something there. And I think this is interesting because you contrast it with another company who produces supercars. And I don't say this as a criticism of them, just a comparison. Someday I would like to drive a Ferrari, so I don't want to get myself on any kind of blacklist. But I have a Ferrari, but that's a story for another time. So Ferrari are often kind of seen and used for writing cease and desist letters to customers even, or people that have their cars for various reasons. So I think two of the quite famous examples, or well-known examples, are the DJ artist, music artist deadmau5. So he's sort of the guy that has the big head with the ears on. He had a Lamborghini, I'm going to say it's an F430, and he modified the car by changing the badge and sort of wrapping the car with a Nan cat. So you're going to have to Google that, but it's like this meme of this cat that is a piece of toast or something like that. It's kind of like an 8-bit graphic of a cat that is a piece of toast or bread or something. And he has a rainbow flying behind him. And so he modified his car with this wrap, and he also changed the name of the car to Ferrari rather than a Ferrari. And then he changed the logo a bit as well. And so I think what's really interesting here is that Lamborghini kind of sent him the cease and desist. And the idea is that, I understand you need to protect your brand. And so what they've said to him is that, well, we feel that this negatively affects our brand, and so we would like you to stop doing this, otherwise we'll sue you. And so deadmau5 did that. And another one was, I think, the case of a fashion designer called Philip Plein. Is it Philip Plein? I'm probably saying his name wrong. But he posted a picture on his Instagram of a Ferrari that was green with some green shoes that he had designed that were part of his clothing brand. And so he was sent a cease and desist to tell him not to do that because you don't represent us, basically. And so I think this is a really interesting kind of comparison, because I think it's not necessarily, as much as I'd like it to be, a given that, cars are forever seen as like these amazing things that people love, and that the petrol heads exist forever, and there's always going to be a market for the supercar. I don't know that that's a given. As much as I would like it to be, I don't know that is a given. And I think that looking at the Lamborghini story, although it was a couple of years ago now, I think it's really interesting that they took that route, and I think that they're kind of opening themselves up to new audiences. And I do wonder for Ferrari, who I think have a slightly different kind of racing heritage and pedigree, I understand there's a need for them to to protect their brand, and their brand is positioned quite differently from Lamborghini. Lamborghini's maybe seen as a bit more of a what's the word? If there was such thing as an every person supercar or luxury brand, maybe, and maybe Ferrari is a bit more elitist in some ways. I think there's debates to be had there, but I think it's interesting looking at these two different approaches. So one brand's kind of a bit more embracing the things, whereas a lot of the comments on this video, interestingly, on YouTube, were like, if this was Ferrari, you'd get a cease and desist. And I'm not saying that there's a right case to go for either one, because for each brand, they've got different ways that they want to protect their product and protect their image. But I do think it's interesting to, when you think about what the future of cars might be like, when you think about, electric cars and maybe them making car ownership a bit more like having a product, or we're kind of making it a bit more faceless. Do cars continue to have the same appeal in the future? Does everyone, you've seen the price? If you've seen the price of sort of classic cars and classic supercars, they kind of continuously go up. If you want to buy a McLaren F1 when it was new, it was around £1 million. But if you want to buy a McLaren F1 today, you're looking at probably in a region of 10, maybe even £20 million and up. Similar sort of thing for the Ferrari Enzo, LaFerrari, Porsche 918, all these sort of grail kind of cars, and a lot of these really high-end supercars, their prices continue to go up. P1, for example, McLaren P1, again, the list goes on and on and on. But does that continue forever? Possibly, possibly not. I mean, everything at the moment suggests that it does, but as the way that car technology changes and maybe the ownership of cars change, does it make sense to continue to do things in exactly the same way? And, looking at that Lamborghini example, I can't help but feel that it's a good thing that they've done there, and that, this idea of kind of introducing like a younger generation to cars and to like the passion and joy that you can get from cars. I think it's something that manufacturers continuously need to do to ensure that their place is still there in the future. Otherwise, potentially, maybe you risk going the way of someone like Nokia or BlackBerry, where at one point you're kind of like the thing to have and everyone loves them, but then at some point you kind of seem to be less relevant. Will it happen with? Am I saying this will happen with Ferrari? I doubt it. I strongly doubt it. I think there's enough of a market there and a desire there. They've got a Formula One team, but you don't. No one knows for definite what tomorrow holds, and so I do think that it is important that generations get introduced to cars in ways that are meaningful. We can't expect that everyone ends up building a car with their dad on their driveway. I don't think that, maybe that isn't as interesting to young people as it once was. But the idea of 3D printing is this great kind of crossroads of like technology, so it's maybe more interesting to like a young person or to a really young person, and it kind of dovetailing that with cars and the excitement of like a supercar is a great way, I think, to introduce someone to a supercar. I think Lamborghini actually provided like a steering wheel and some headlights, which was really good of them. I think a good example of this is like, luxury watches as well. So at the moment, the market for luxury watches is quite big. It goes up and down, as does the economy. But, if you've got a AP, a Royal Oak or a Rolex, like a Hulk or even a sort of a Submariner or a Nautilus, there's a whole bunch of watches, a Patek, that are only going up in value. And if you can, they're almost like, I don't want to compare them to trainers, but hear what I'm saying. So similar to the way that there exists like a resale market for Jordans. So if you want to get one of these watches, or you want to get a pair of Jordans, you need to get the Jordans when they come out to pay a reasonable price, or to pay retail. If you don't get them retail, then resale value goes through the roof. And so it's a similar thing with brands like AP, Rolex, Patek Philippe. If you can even get like an allocation on these watches, which is already itself really hard to get, then you stand to make a lot of money. Their values are going through the roof. That said, I do think that it's dangerous to assume that just because that has been the case, that is always going to be the case. And I think that's important that brands do make efforts to introduce their products to new audiences, particularly sort of long-established brands that seemingly are maybe even too big to fail. I think something like those watch brands could do. And I saw something, someone mentioned this in the video. So there's a guy called Nico, he's a watch guy on YouTube. And he spoke about this idea of like AP doing a collaboration with Casio, and that this could be an opportunity for them to introduce like the watch and watch ownership to a whole new audience. And I think for something like a watch, it's really an interesting idea because, Prior to smartwatches, I've got Apple Watch on today. Prior to smartwatches, there hasn't really been massive advancements in watch technology design. And so having an analog watch, for example, there is no real reason to have an analog watch. Everyone's got a phone. Finding the time is easily available on many devices. We have our phones with us all the time. And so the idea of kind of having like this analog watch that only serves one purpose. I think personally there's something really cool about that, and I love watches. But to a young person in the future, will that still have the same meaning? Is there a reason to care about a watch? You know, could the brand Rolex be meaningless potentially to someone in the future? Possibly not. I don't think there's anything that suggests that is going to be the case. But I think it's important that you don't make assumptions and that brands continue to make investments in bringing their products and showing their products to a new audience. And so something like that, where you've got a brand like AP collaborating with Casio, potentially brings this idea of kind of watch ownership and what makes sort of watches special to a whole new audience and a whole new level of interest, and kind of secure and guarantee their future. And so I think that's kind of like where I'm going to end today. But I do think it's a really interesting point, though. You know, what does the future look like for ownership? What does luxury mean in the future? Are all these luxury brands going to be viewed the same way? Particularly because this is a car podcast, I'm talking about cars. And again, sometimes I talk about other random things, but what does the future hold? And, you know, what are brands doing today to ensure that there's still going to be an interest in their product tomorrow? You know, if people move towards Teslas and seeing cars as just being something that you own or something that you use or something you have access to, does the desire potentially start to go away for some of the rarer and more exotic vehicles? Possibly not. But either way, let me know your thoughts. I encourage you to get involved in the discourse and comment on this video on YouTube. I'll be doing some more things in the future, hopefully with some other people, and hopefully getting to speak to some interesting brands. There's a company that electrifies Land Rover Defenders who I have a contact at, and so at some point I may have them on this podcast. But I am really keen to start to talk to other people. So if you do have someone that's interested in cars, and I think what's really keen for me is that someone who's like passionate about them or just has an interesting story, then I'm keen to speak to those people as well. And so and share this sort of idea of what car culture is and what it might be in the future with others. That said, until next time, take care of yourselves, and I look forward to seeing you in episode or podcast number 4, and hopefully having a name for this podcast. But yeah, until then, take care of yourselves and each other. That's not my sign off. But yeah, until then, peace.